Okay, so do we want to move on to the next question then, or do we have more
We can,
on?
we can move on.
Okay. So King Asanoki asks, what relationship Witchblood has with concepts like the Goen or Goess of Goetia, and how it relates to spirit work like necromancy? Uh, which I think he thought was kind of not a great question when he asked, but I think it actually is kind of a good one. Um,
I mean,
anyone?
I guess a person who is witch-blooded would be better at these things quicker than a person who wasn't, but I don't think any more than it has any relationship to magic writ large. It has a specific relationship to that. I would actually say that I think that people who are witch-blooded who have specialties at necromancy tend to go about it in a very different way than a person who doesn't, who has a specialty in necromancy. And I don't necessarily see from my own lived experience that one is more effective or less. But also that the differences, while extant, aren't particularly important.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, except with this like caveat that when you come from a family of witches, like in particular case of necromancy, it is my experience that people who can talk to the dead while they're alive are the same people who are good at talking to the living when they're dead. And I think that like having a chain of that in your ancestry is helpful.
No, sure, yeah, I could see
There's
that.
dead people who give a shit about you and are also witches. But that's the only like real connection I would immediately think of between like witch bloodedness and
I could see that.
yeah.
I guess thinking in terms of Goetia as classic Greek sorcery or magic, as opposed to like the more modern versions of it, that is essentially, depending on which historians you're looking at, essentially a synonym for witchcraft. And so, I mean, I would say that it's the same idea, same concept. Looking at the Greek form of it, which Jake's whole thing of Goetia is what a Goes does, not a Goes is a Goes because they do Goetia. Then it's kind of the same thing as like you've got people who they are this thing, they have this nature, and that puts them in those spaces where they're overlapping with spirit spaces because that seems to be the core element of Greek sorcery or that type of Greek sorcery is that you are a person who is overlapping those spirit spaces and can travel between them and this space. And so it ends up boiling down to the same thing essentially, in my opinion. Uh,
To that. I think Allison had something to say though.
I was hoping so.
That was pretty much what I was going to say about like witchcraft being magic that a witch does, and Goetia being, what a ghost does or going.
Okay,
So
I mean, I just, you being the PGM legend, I think you would have, even deeper concepts about that in terms of like expansion on that. Because actually, a question that I would posit to Allison, because I'm just curious, do you believe that the magic specifically in the PGM is more applicable by witch-blooded people based on the spirits and energies that it calls upon, or no?
I am unsure. I mean, I definitely I think that some of the techniques that I have learned, like journeying and things like that, and like merging with other spirits, are very relevant to that. But I'm not I'm not really close enough to other people that are just starting out with the PGM and seeing them like in person do the magic
Hmm.
to really know if it's that big of a difference. Like the PGM just seems to hit hard for everyone. Um, so
Can I maybe address that question? So I agree with everything Allison said, but I will also say that like I think it is a mistake to think of the PGM as a singular kind of magic. Like there's actually a lot of different kinds in there being practiced, like being written by a lot of different kinds of people. So like some of it, like I would say the author of PGM4, witch-blooded as fuck. But I would not necessarily say that about all of those texts. Like I think there's a lot of different things going on in the PGM, some of which I think of as more in the like witch-blooded, spirity, goetic sense, and some of them more on the like the way we're saying that like grimoire magic. Look, I think being witch-blooded probably helps you at all magic. I think that's fair.
Oh yeah, obviously,
like,
yeah.
But a lot of it is just like, there's a system and you just like turn the crank and follow the instructions and things work. And I think there's plenty of that in the PGM as well.
Yeah, and so a question that I wanted to ask for Allison, if you're okay with it, Allison, uh, is there stuff you have encountered in the PGM that you think would be useful for people who are trying to generate this kind of witch blood condition in themselves, or are there things that you've encountered in the PGM that you feel overlap more specifically with the types of things we've been talking about tonight? I guess those are two questions, two fairly different questions, honestly.
Yeah, I'm trying to parse it out because there's things that I do with PGM magic that aren't really a part of the PGM. So for example, I wrote a little guide about solar magic, um, but a lot of times when I do that, I kind of like project part of me into the sun, and I like let the sun beam into me, and there's like all this extra stuff going on that's not just about saying the words. And then there's sometimes where I make that connection and I'm not saying the words at all. Like it's more like a um, sun salutation sort of thing, but there's an energetic transfer that fires me up to do it. And when I've really got it going, it feels like there's um, not like a hot fire, but like it feels kind of like there's the good kind of like flame coming out of my mouth and my eyes, and like just, you know, I'm just lit up with it.
Hmm.
So
That kind of also mirrors how Greeks described witches. It's like, oh, just like all of their kind, their eyes glowed with the sunlight, and like sort of describing fire and sunlight shooting out from eyes and mouths and things like that.
yeah, and I believe the people seeing it have some psychic ability, but people have seen that from me.
Hmm.
So
So,
I think there's a very little psychic ability. I actually think most people can see that. Like when you really query them about it, I think most people who have seen it happen, like with you or broadly, right? They will. They struggle to articulate what they saw, but I actually think it's not it doesn't require much in the way of psychic ability. Like I think actually everybody has seen someone like on fire with the spirit, and like they know what that looks like.
Sure, yeah, I would
yeah,
argue. No, I would argue that they do, and then their minds rewrite the experience. So, like, much can be said, and obviously, they're not going to go into this is a huge rant, but much can be said about the nature of psychic perception, internal vision versus external vision, and how they toggle back and forth, and how they bleed, and to what degree what one sees what in what way. Um, but like, yeah, I think that a lot of people will witness a thing like that, and it'll seem like a snap that's a hugely vivid daydream for literally just a second, often accompanied by a popping sensation in the head.
Mm.
And they'll be like, "Oh, well, yeah, it's you just seem crazy on fire, it was awesome that you did that, whatever." And then they'll, much like a dream, forget.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I've heard it described as like, oh, it was like a beam of sunlight, uh, hit your heart, like was beaming at your chest. But that's weird because based on like the direction of the sun at the time and the windows, that couldn't have been a thing.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah. So, um, the last question we have, aside from I think one that we skipped, uh, asks, and I think again this is kind of like a good transition. Archie asks about the internal locus of witchcraft, and he notes that it doesn't seem to be discussed frequently, and would like to know more about what this means, how it works, and what the experience is like. He also asks if this relates to the idea of the body as a magical tool. I think, like Allison, your kind of description of interacting with the sun this way kind of connects with that, and sort of like what I was talking about earlier with how there's different ways that you can kind of understand the shape of your magical body as it connects with the tools that you're working with and all. Um, and I think that's something that tends to get not addressed because it's a little different from how things are talked about in a lot of modern stuff. And in older stuff, no one talks about the internal elements of it. Uh, so I guess this is a much more of an experiential question. And I know, Allison, like you and I have talked about this subject a few times, but did you have any thoughts about kind of like what the actual internal experience is like, what it means to sort of work with things from moving them through yourself and in yourself, or ways that you can connect with things externally by working with things internal to yourself?
So I learned this technique that Caroline Kenner teaches about merging with spirits, and there's a part of me that's usually doing that when I'm doing magic, and it's very it's not like possession or like an intruder. It's just like it's almost kind of like we're holding hands, and everything's good. um but I really am like reaching out a part of myself to what I'm trying to connect with and pulling it down through my energetic body into my terrestrial body, which is how I feel that we can get very terrestrial results with magic. I like to think of it as like the chain of manifestation or whatever, where there's things over there, but I'm here, and here where I am is where I need the results. I don't need the results like to happen on some other plane. Like I need them here in my life or in the lives of other people. Um, and I'm the link that makes that terrestrial. So
I think that's kind of a neat way to put it in terms of the idea again of that kind of interconnection between the spirit world and the physical world, but also being very rooted in the idea of like fundamental physical change in the world as opposed to just like kind of an airy fairy, like, oh, I made this manifestation on the astral and that's enough because I can feel good about that astral manifestation. And I think that really gets to the idea of like the witch as embodied and connected to the physical world as opposed to a more purely mystical practice.
right, like I feel like there's an active part that I have that is making this manifest, as opposed to entirely just delegating, and saying like, hey, can you please do this thing for me? um, like which I sometimes do also. There's all sorts of different techniques, but especially if I'm trying to make a physical object magical, I'm going to want it to be as grounded on the terrestrial plane as possible.
Makes sense.
Oh, definitely agreed. I think that I mean, I do a lot of the same stuff that Allison's discussing. I think that those of us who are very good do what Allison's discussing. Um, but I think that using like the witch is a locus of power. Like one can look at like, for example, the concept of sending the fetch as a very folklorically witchcraft way. Now that means different things to different people. For context, what I mean, how the way I was taught was like the fetch is an aspect of you, specifically an aspect of your witching self that you will detach and then send into the world. This is also not without risk, because if it is damaged, captured, etc. This is also the thing that is often captured in a witch's bottle, another witch's fetch, and then this thing. So, the smart among us will also send guardians out with the fetch, and it will not be alone. But, saying that out, it can do what you can do. And so you send yourself in a very visceral way to another place, to another location, to either get something or establish something. Sometimes witches will be doing a ritual physically in their temple space, and have sent the fetch to complete the ritual elsewhere, like, for a client or something, or things are very important. And in that sense, like, that locus is mobile. You can send it pretty much anywhere you want to accomplish the things that you can do with your internal power, anywhere. It's one of many ways to do that, but it's a very classically witchcrafty way. Typically, the fetch is also an astral body that one pilots, that one can fortify and weaponize in ways that one's like more pure or unfiltered astral body, it would be much harder. So, like, to send yourself out in the form of an animal, for example, your fetch takes that shape. To send yourself out in the form of like a warrior version of yourself with all these weapons, the fetch will take that. Because also, if the fetch is damaged, provided it isn't captured, it can return to you, and the damage will be more minimal.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting way of looking at that idea of extended parts of the soul complex. That the that's definitely like a lot more related to a lot of the historical folklore around the fetch than what you see in a lot of more contemporary stuff as well. Um, I think, to me, a lot of the way I think about it is kind of the stuff that I was saying earlier, that it's like you're you're creating some connection between yourself and what it is you're trying to impact, and the tools and the powers and the spirits and the forces that you're using to impact that thing. But you are ultimately kind of the filter, or the center point that everything is running through and connecting through, in order to create the result, as opposed to kind of you are standing there in like an isolated, hermetically sealed circle space, and calling on something that is completely separate from you, that is staying outside and away from you, and you're having a very ikdu conversation, as opposed to a let's kind of come together and things sort of flow in and out. And I think there's utility to both approaches. Um, I think one is the approach that more people can naturally do, and one is the approach that is more if you are the sort of person who's going to be exposed to these things and learning these things through your own nature and through things you're exposed to in the world, then you're going to end up more with that integrated approach, because it's the easier way to get close to and connect with those things.
Sure. I mean, even if you look at like the mechanics of how a blasting rod works, at least as I was taught, you have the blackthorn wand or rod. You've made a connection or pact with the spirit of the blackthorn. You hold the rod, and then you braid a serpent energy up your arm into the serpent energy. Then from the rod, you braid them together in a helix. You are then connected, and then you send your evil eye through there, which then gets filtered and magnified, then blasts a thing. Right, like that's like, and in a sense, it's a force multiplier, because Lady Blackthorn is hurting them the same way you are, and in different ways. And of course, in that, you can speak to the spirit, commune with it. The more you use the blasting rod, the stronger it gets. If you're not a complete edgelord, you don't have that many opportunities to use the blasting rod in life, although they can be used to cure cancers and kill diseases. So there's that.
Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to add there, or thoughts to toss in?
Think like you guys pretty much said what I would have said. Like, except that I will say that I do think that when we use the word witchcraft to describe a kind of magic, as opposed to many of the other words, I do think there is some kind of implication that, like, the way Archie said it, that like the locus of the power is inside the practitioner in a way. that is distinct from, like you're saying, like a circle and triangle conjuration, where it is more understood to be an external force. And I do think that broadly, at least for me, but I think other people too in modern English, particularly in the States, like when we apply the word witch as witchcraft as opposed to sorcery or like other words for things, I think there is an implication of that internality.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was younger, people looked at it as a division of um like ceremonial magic is about like forms and structures, and witchcraft is about feelings, and which I think is a really kind of shitty way of getting towards that idea.
Yeah.
But like it's not 100% wrong, but it's not the best way of encapsulating that. But I also think now there's been kind of a shift where it's like I think the idea of like sorcery is something that you acquire, and witchcraft is something that's innate and is part of you. Uh, Gets to that idea also, but doesn't fully touch it. But then the flip side, it's like you've got the whole, oh, witch is just synonymous with magician, and anyone who does magic is a witch. Anyone who is a witch is a magician. Like all of these things are the same, and it's all just like whatever words you want to use for yourself. I think we lose something when we start to do that, uh, because there are differences in different types of magic and different approaches. And if we're going to say it's all the same, then it's like we can't talk about those differences if we don't have words for them.
I agree. And there are also lots of external differences. Like, I also think that a lot of times the distinction between witchcraft and sorcery is largely about like the class status of the person doing it relative to the speaker. You know what I mean? Like, I think there are a lot of ways in which the different words are different, but I do think that there is a sense in which, like, a witch be magic and a magician do magic.
Yeah, no, I think that's like, to me that's the best distinction. Um, and so I think we're kind of at that point where it seems like we're all sort of winding down. We have two questions we skipped over. Uh, so um, I will go through those questions, and we can decide if we want to try to dig into them. The first one is witchcraft and witchblood are related to descent from spiritual beings like giants, fairies, dragons, and angels in various folklore. Witches are also related to spiritual beings like Hecate, the devil, and the fairy queen. How do we understand this folklore, and how do the relationships with these spiritual beings change in the context of witchblood? And then the other remaining question: most cultures have spirit taxonomies, including various types of witches and other magical beings. There are also people who defy categorization. How does this fit into the discussion? Um, so I don't know if those are things that we've really covered otherwise in the other questions we've answered. Um,
I would
but
say
I'm
we have
also,
covered those directly. I mean, I would say I have covered those both directly, pretty cogently. But to
yeah,
summarize it, yeah, a lot of cultures, different ones to different degrees, have different taxonomies describing the kind of witchcraft, the legacy, the lineage, the abilities you're using. And also some of them get hyper specific, like the difference between a vampire and a strigoi being born with a five-chambered heart, like literally a genetic thing, and a vampire being a witch who chose to become that thing. Count Orlok, vampire, in terms of the recent Nosferatu movie, not Strigoi, wasn't born that way. Um, but at the same time, there's plenty that defy, categorization. In fact, there are certain cultures that just have words for that. Like, and this isn't a literal example, but like, oh yeah, that person's a fairy, that person's a mermaid, that person's just a fucking witch. I don't even know what's going on with him. That one's a goblin, that one's a super goblin, that one's a hobgoblin. What's the difference? They smell worse as you get down the line. Like there's a whole situation, but in reality, like, yeah, sometimes it's just like, yeah, they're just special enough that there's the thing. Different lineages, clans, families, traditions you can initiate into will be like, yeah, we're from this thing, we descend from this thing. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a thing, but I would also stress that The stories that follow that fall into the maybe box almost immediately, where it's like, oh, we come from this lineage, and it's like, okay, cool, maybe. It's like, oh yeah, but we all have visionary experiences, sight unseen, double blind, that are the same. Okay, well then in that case, maybe it's more likely. But the question I think people always need to ask themselves is, what does this actually do for me, aside from make me look and sound like I'm talking on a 2003 Otherkin forum? Which, once again, I would always love the opportunity for like a turbo skeptic to watch a video like this, and for me to watch them watching it without knowing that I'm watching them watching it, because it reminds me once of having an argument with a Bigfooter and being told by a UFO enthusiast that we were both idiots. And that's a humbling experience I think we all need.
So I think I tend to be the sort of person who likes to be able to categorize things and likes taxonomies and structures and stuff. But I also have very much in the last several years been like, yeah, spirit taxonomies, they're kind of perilous. Like they involve things that we can't fully measure, and they involve things that are described differently based on different cultural lenses. And so saying what exactly is the same and what exactly is related gets to be really hard unless we're talking about like transition of myth or transition of words as opposed to the actual realities of it. And so I'm kind of have come around more to the idea of like, yeah, I'm not super concerned about spirit taxonomies outside of like the practical nature of here's some rough groupings, and some spirits might fall into multiple groups depending on how you're approaching them or how you look at them. And I think it's the kind of the same way for me as far as like witchblood and witchcraft. Like I'm not super concerned with, oh, you're a descendant of the Nephilim, or oh, you're a descendant of like these fairies or these monsters, or oh, you went to the crossroads and got changed there or did this thing. To me, it's like, again, like you said, it's the practical meaning of it. Like, what does this do? Like, do you have these features? Do you not have these features? Like, do the spirits come when you call them? Like, can you get things done? And do you have these experiences that seem familiar or seem like what I would expect for someone making one of those claims? I'm not super concerned with how to categorize where people come from or what they come from. Uh, because I don't, well, I imagine it has an impact. I don't think it has an impact that is easy for us to measure in a useful way.
I agree. Like BJ, I am also by nature a person who loves to sort things into little lists. So fun. But similarly, like as I have grown in magic, I feel like those categories are useful only when they're like, well, I've worked with 16 river spirits, and here are things that I think are just true about rivers that are not true about mountains, right? And that sort of categorization. But I also think that I say this a lot, that a lot of the words that we use to categorize spirits are actually categorizing a relationship one has with that spirit, right? And so like the same spirit can kind of appear in different categories for different people. So I think about like God and demon in particular, having been repeatedly told by many people that my gods are demons. Like I think they're right. Do you know what I mean? Like I am having a God relationship with that spirit, and they are having a demon relationship with that spirit. And I think a lot of times those category words are really describing the relationship more so than they are like a species description of the spirit. But not always, right? Rivers indeed are different than mountains, and river spirits are different than mountain spirits.
No, I can see that. I don't know. I think it would be hard to get me to jump on board with that idea entirely because of like the way I approach religiosity separately from magic, but I think there's a lot of sensibility to it. Like I can see the logic behind it and see how it makes sense. I also want to toss in that like animal taxonomy
Mm-hmm.
and like
Awesome.
taxonomy, it's also like kind of made up too. So like the like a lot of times we think of like taxonomies as like, oh, we know these things are related in these ways, and it's like, no, we just we know they have similar features, and so we're guessing they have a connection. And that's very much the spirits were doing the same thing when we try to have spirit taxonomies and folkloric creatures like witches were doing the same thing, but we can't actually measure or like show consistently what those similarities and differences are there. So
That was exactly what I was going to add. I was going to say, like, okay, what is a fish? Well, like we all kind of know what a fish is, but when you really deep dive into it, it's very complicated.
yeah, and I think Allison, you were one of the first people that pointed out to me that like thinking about it in terms of ecologies makes sense. And it was like that was kind of like what I was doing when I was like building out living spirits, but I didn't have a way to describe what I was doing. And I think like I had gone over some of the stuff with it, and you were like, "Yeah, we need more people looking at spirit ecology." And I was like, "Oh my God, that's exactly that's the approach is looking at it as an ecology, not a taxonomy." Which I guess gets back to Sarah's idea about relationships too. Um, the yeah, and then in terms of like how these ideas of spiritual descent connect with like relationships with contemporary spiritual with other spiritual beings. I think that one's kind of a hard one to answer, like because if you don't know what you're descended from or what types of creatures you are necessarily connected to in the spirit world, then I think that adjusts the ability to know how those things will shape your relationship with other spirits. Because it's like if you're not descended from the fair folk, but you're descended from some other sort of spirit being, does that impact your relationship with the fair folk? I think the fact that like you have magic and the fact that you have those spirit relationships impacts your relationship with the fair folk or impacts your relationship with the crossroads devil or with Hecate or whoever you're approaching. But I don't think it's necessarily specific to like what mythical creature you might be connected to, if that's how your witch blood works at all. If it's coming from something other than that connection, uh, I think it's just the faculties that you have make an adjustment there in terms of your spirit relationships. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
I would argue the most important factor of your ability to have relationships with spirits at all is to be heard and perceived by them. Witches are louder and brighter. And if you want to talk about like a locus of power, that's what it is. It surrounds you when you are working it. I would actually often caution people that just because you're descended from, say, a fairy, she was a fairy, but just because you're descended from a fairy doesn't mean they give a fuck about you.
Yeah.
Like I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was born in Georgia. I can't return to Georgia and be like, I am the king of peaches. Because I was born here, I demand fealty. Like that will get my ass beat up and dragged behind a truck. And it should. And so I would argue that it's kind of the same spiritually. It's like you're descended from a fairy. Okay, suppose that's true. What clan, what this, what that, what that. If those definitions even make sense, but maybe they do, maybe they don't. And if they do, to what end can you leverage it? And will these things appreciate being leveraged? Because like just because you come from something doesn't mean it gives a shit about you.
Yeah.
Which I mean, I can't speak for other people, but also true about humans, right?
No, absolutely like, true about you.
Everything that's true about your human family is also true about like a wider spirit family. Like, yeah, some of my ancestors are fucking terrible and are like actively opposed to me and getting in my way. And I think that's true like for all humans.
Oh, sure, absolutely. But that's one of the reasons why I also often bring up, even when it comes to like, biological ancestral spirits that were witches themselves. There's no guarantee that person wasn't one of the true evil witches from history who wants to steal your body, who wants to, skin ride you as much as possible to experience sensation, who wants to live in your children, if possible, you know what I mean? Who wants to do all these things. Or who will go, I will only help you if it suits me or if it suits what I think is important. It's kind of like, there are certain spirits of witchcraft in various lineages, and indeed they can come with you from birth, that were never human, that don't even pretend like they were ever human, and they will give you some very inhuman solutions to very human problems, often to a comical degree. Like, well, so I like this girl. Kill her. What? Fucking kill her. But what? Why? I don't know. I just don't like her. It's like, what don't you like her? I don't know. I don't like her. Why do you like her? Like, what? Why do I have to qualify to you? It's like, I don't know. You called me here. Fuck, I was doing something. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you never have interactions like that, you may not be doing the damn thing. But truly, like, again, much ado is made of everything that doesn't rely on you getting shit done yourself within the Witchblood conversation, which is one of the reasons why I was really interested in doing this, is to hold people's feet to the fire and being like, your lineage does not fucking matter unless you are using it. If you can even leverage it at all. None of these things matter. No gift, no talent, no aptitude matters unless it is being applied.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's almost insulting if you aren't. Because there are people who would literally kill you and eat you for the purpose of being you.
Mm-hmm.
To go back to the whole stolen fire thing, the witches who get that shit snatched are the ones who don't use it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's considered a resource left unattended. Because remember, the spiritual world is dark forest.
All right. So I think that is, unless anyone else has anything they want to add on, I think that is a good place to stop.